What's up everyone, Alex here. We live in an age where video game adaptations are just awesome. From Sonic the Hedgehog to the Mario movie to The Last of Us, Twisted Metal, and the recently released Fallout TV series, which I've actually been watching a lot of, and it's fantastic. It's really awesome. But I did notice that the TV adaptations focused a lot on post-apocalyptic stories, and that kind of got me thinking, have there ever been any JRPGs released that have a post-apocalyptic theme? And so in this video, I found 10 JRPGs that actually have this subject matter. Now, I want to be clear here by saying that the games featured on this list either have the post-apocalypse as its main overarching theme, or it's an element in its gameplay of some sort that can be fairly obvious. I wanted to make sure that if the post-apocalypse was this huge event for a game, that it wasn't going to be included on this list, so you're welcome. Alright, I've given enough of the parameters, so let's check out some awesome JRPGs that have that post-apocalyptic theme. 13 Sentinels, Aegis Rim. 13 Sentinels narrative is quite interesting because it is completely disattached from the combat in the game. But even more so than that, you're given the power to experience the story in however order you want. What makes this even more confusing is that every single character exists in a specific point in time, one of which is a post-apocalyptic version of the world. And it's because of this structure that I described 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim in my review as casting you as some sort of investigator reporter. Every single time you select a character to follow, you're gathering clues as to what's really happening in the background. But the most surprising thing about 13 Sentinels is how it's still able to create a lot of tension and mystery as it's answering some of your questions. And just when you think that this game was going to falter somehow and not be able to answer all of the questions that it poses, it manages to make the narrative come together at the very end. Believe me when I say that I've never met a single person that I've talked to that have said that they would love to be able to forget everything that they've experienced in 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, if only because of the fact that the entire experience of revealing every single revelation in the game was such a treat that no one, not even to this day, has found a game matching the ambition of 13 Sentinels narrative. Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne. Okay, to be fair, several Shin Megami Tensei games can take this game's place. But out of all of them, Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne became one of the most revered JRPGs on the PS2. And for good reason. It's absolutely stellar. One of the reasons why it's so good is because unlike other games that allude to the apocalypse, either through subtle context clues or exposition, this is one of the few games that I can think of that lets you witness it happen right before your very eyes. Shortly after the game starts, the player is treated to a front row seat for the end of the world. And while I guess I should feel bad about it, this massive calamity instead gets me pumped because of how cool it all looks. After such a climactic start, the rest of the game has the player exploring the remains of our desecrated world as it's being overtaken by demons, which again is just really awesome and kinda sounds like the cover of a hardcore metal album. More than just being superficially cool, however, the game's dark atmosphere, demon collecting, and tough difficulty curve have all contributed to making this one of the most memorable games of its era. And the best part is that you can pick it up on modern consoles and experience it for yourself right now. Zanki 0 Last Beginning. Zanki 0 is quite a strange game, because when you start the game, you are in modern times, and the next thing you know, you are stuck on Garage Island along with other survivors of what seems like the apocalypse. But the weird thing about that is that's actually not the weirdest thing in this game, and I'm gonna refrain from talking about spoilers here. The reason why it's so weird is because its story is actually developed by the Danganronpa team, who employed the talents at Lankars, who were responsible for the Etrian Odyssey series, to create a game that has first-person dungeon crawling, survival mechanics, and base building. I love base building. And the thing is when you actually take a look at the game, its colorful graphics are really arresting and makes you forget that this is actually a pretty grim game with a lot of potential triggers. all of the survivors have a dark past, and the game is going to go through them one by one. The mysteries of Zanki Zero are numerous, so if you're looking for a first-person dungeon crawler to try and you're not familiar with the genre, I think you're going to enjoy Zanki Zero for its unsettling nature and its post-apocalyptic vibes. Crystalis. I bet you didn't expect to see a quaint-looking NES game on this list. Sure enough, on top of being a great Zelda-style action RPG, Crystalis is also in fact a post-apocalyptic story. The game takes place in the year 2097, a century after a thermonuclear war ravaged society and reverted it back to a more primitive state, where technology was outright abandoned. Oh, and I guess there's magic now too, because why the heck not? And while its post-apocalypticness might not come across while playing through the game casually, by paying closer attention to the story and environments, it becomes clear that there's more going on than what it appears to be on the surface. It'll just seem like your typical straightforward fantasy game, with swords, sorcery, caves, and other such staples. That being said, if you simply wanted to play a Zelda-inspired action RPG, especially those of you who have always wanted to play a bizarro version of Link to the Past that allowed you to level up, you really can't go wrong with Crystalis. With its fun combat, bumping soundtrack, and charming visuals, it's easy to forget that the game takes place after such a calamitous event. Resonance of Fate. I was always under the impression that Resonance of Fate just took place in some random steampunk world imagined by Tri-Ace. But no, as it turns out, this is Earth in some vague distant future. Much like the rest of the experience, Resonance of Fate is an odd and surprising title, which interestingly extends to the gameplay as well. I remember initially struggling to understand how the combat worked, like, why are my characters flipping around shooting handguns, or do the types of guns I use matter? How does any of this work? I did figure it out eventually, and the combat actually turned out to be a ton of fun. The learning curve feels a bit steep, for sure, but once you figure it out, everything comes together and just clicks in a satisfying way. But knowing that the game is actually post-apocalyptic, however, makes me look at all these environments we're fighting in very differently. The fact that the entire game takes place in an impossibly large tower far above the Earth's surface starts to make a lot more sense. While I don't think this game will be everyone's cup of tea because of how seemingly impenetrable the combat comes across, as well as the obtuse nature of its narrative, I think others will appreciate the effort needed to dig deep and see what makes this a special title. Phantasy Star 4. Phantasy Star 4 is the pinnacle of Sega RPGs, and this game has a ton of memorable characters and great plot twists that makes everybody clamor for a follow-up. Like, I remember playing this game for the first time back in the day and really loving the vibrant visuals, the anime art style, and a fantastic soundtrack. And the story, of course, that talks about the previous games and puts a spin on all that built-up lore. And what you have is basically this game that has ultimately aged well. In fact, I actually replayed through this game 2 years ago, and it still felt as good as it was when I first played it back in the 90s. And if you've never played any of the Phantasy Star games before, I highly recommend giving them a shot, because these are timeless classics. Yes, I'm including Generations of Doom as well. Chrono Trigger. Do I need to really elaborate on this? Chrono Trigger is a time-traveling RPG classic that lets you travel to the Stone Age all the way to 2300 AD when the future is destroyed. You can't get any more post-apocalyptic than that. But your journey through all these time periods is anchored by a fantastic cast of characters that are lovingly rendered in classic 16-bit form that's actually worked on by a dream team of people. Of course, I'm talking about Yuji Horii from Dragon Quest, Akira Toriyama of Dragon Ball, Dragon Quest, and Sandland, Hironobu Sakaguchi, who created the Final Fantasy series, Nobuo Uematsu, who composed the soundtracks of the first 9 Final Fantasy games, Yasumi Matsuno, who would go on to compose the soundtrack for Xenogears and Chrono Cross, and Tetsuya Takahashi, who would eventually direct Xenogears, the Xenosaga trilogy, and the Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy. So while people will only remember Sakaguchi, Horii, and Toriyama, there are so many awesome people that worked on this game that went on to make really incredible things. And if you want to see a distillation of sheer JRPG perfection, you seriously don't need to look any further than Chrono Trigger. Xenoblade Chronicles 3. If you're new to the Xenoblade series, you might actually think that this is a strange inclusion on this list. But if you just start a new game of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you'll be greeted with a festive scene where everyone is happy and joyous. And the next thing you know, you're in a scene where teenagers are being signed up for the military and being told that they only have 10 years to live. What the hell? But more so than that, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the ultimate realization of this grand vision that Tetsuya Takahashi has had since he started making his own games. And of course, that's not even talking about the awesome DLC that basically ties all of the Xenoblade games together. I just absolutely love that idea that all the teens had 10 years to live. No, I don't mean that in a masochistic sense, but it's the kind of philosophical question that many of us actually ignore. And this is a game that makes all of its characters face that entire question. In terms of gameplay, Xenoblade Chronicles 3's class system is also magical. And for some reason, they managed to be able to create a gameplay system that's not confusing, which allows you to control 7 characters. That is absolutely insane. If you asked me about that months before its release, I would have told you that that's a crazy idea. But much like most of it, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is well written, well thought out, and is absolutely one of my favorite games in the series. Lisa the Painful. Don't be fooled by its Earthbound-inspired visuals. Lisa the Painful is not some cute and quirky adventure. It's a rather darkly humorous one, in fact. Interestingly, similar to SMT3 Nocturne, while this game does technically begin before the apocalypse, unlike the aforementioned game, we don't really get to see the end happen. The intro plays out as if nothing is wrong, when, all of a sudden, it hard cuts to several years in the future, when our protagonist is no longer a child, and the world appears as if its very life essence had been sapped away from it. This raises a lot of interesting questions for the player to carry with them on their journey, chief among them being, what exactly happened, and why aren't there any women left in the world? True to its name, however, Lisa the Painful can be a frustrating experience at times, given its harsh nature. You truly feel how ruthless and harsh a post-apocalyptic world can be. There's a scarcity of resources, and most of the people you meet are out for themselves and are willing to trick you. Not to mention there are times when hard decisions must be made that have tangible effect on your gameplay. While some might take issue with the elements of this game that could cause friction when playing, these are also what inspire the most interesting gameplay decisions, not to mention that this is one of the most hilarious games I've ever played. The way it's able to perfectly balance its darkness and humor becomes a strong incentive to keep playing, just to see what morbidly hilarious event happens next. While it won't be to everyone's liking, Lisa the Painful is one of those indie darlings that truly earns its reputation. NieR Automata. A lot has been said about the masterpiece that is NieR Automata. However, the fact that it's a post-apocalyptic game seems to fly under the radar a bit. It's not as if the game tries to cover this up or obscure it in any way. More so, that it's almost a footnote of sorts compared to the rest of the experience. It also feels incidental that this is a post-apocalyptic tale, and I think that, in large part, it has something to do with its protagonists being robots. 2B and 9S are simply serving their duty for the humans living on the moon. They aren't really personally bothered or affected by the world being in such a state. After all, they're just doing their job. Ironically, I feel that this gives the game a unique approach, unlike SMT3 or Lisa, where you can truly feel the end and its effect on the world and the characters that inhabit it. NieR Automata instead feels like a more detached perspective. It's like we get to see what the post-apocalypse would be like from an entity that has almost no attachment to the world itself. They'd view it in a more of a matter-of-fact point of view. To be honest, I never really thought of the game in these terms before, and it's making me realize just how thought-provoking of an experience it truly is. It's been 7 years since NieR Automata released, yet I'm still finding new ways to look at it and appreciate what it was trying to convey. I guess that's just one reason why it will likely stand the test of time and remain a classic for many years to come. And that, my friends, are just 10 post-apocalyptic JRPGs. Now, if you have any sort of suggestions as to what other post-apocalyptic JRPGs are out there, I want to hear your suggestions and thoughts about them in the comments below. Just be mindful of spoilers. There are certain games out there that start off that isn't a post-apocalyptic game, and then all of a sudden, sometime in the game, they become post-apocalyptic. Let's try to avoid spoilers as best as humanly possible. So give it some thought a little bit, post your thoughts, and I'm going to be checking them out. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.